Hello, welcome to this Integrated Skills webinar. My name's Stuart Henshaw. I'm the Business Development Director at Integrated Skills. Today, we're considering how to reopen household waste recycling centres safely. Joining me today are Sarahjane Widdowson of Intelisos. Hi, Sarahjane.
Good morning.
And thanks again for joining us. And we've got Paul Jones, who's Service Director at Northumberland County Council. Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Good morning.
Northumberland reopened their HWRCs at the beginning of this week, and Paul's agreed to discuss how that's gone and his thoughts on the process. We'll be hearing a bit more from Paul in a moment. Just as a bit of background to this webinar, ISL runs a monthly webinar series alternating between the more technical aspects of routing, route optimization, and in-cab back office technology. I then run an alternate monthly wider waste management topics webinar, and this really, I suppose, fits into that. Although the COVID-19 situation has really knocked our routine out completely, and we've had 2 ad hoc webinars recently on the subject. But all our webinars, including today's, are on our website, so please have a look. They're all recorded. They're all available there. Please have a look. Thanks very much for joining us today. A couple of weeks ago, we ran our first COVID-19 local authority briefing webinar, and Sarahjane Widdowson provided us with a roundup of local authorities' responses to the crisis, including how authorities were dealing with social distancing at the curbside, and a review of which councils were doing what services, which services had been closed. Can I recommend you actually have a look, if you're interested, at the previous webinar on that subject, COVID-19 briefing webinar, which is on our website. We're going to be hearing from Sarahjane in a second, but I think we left that webinar with many questions. I'm sure we've all got them about the current situation, but one of the kind of, I think we left it with one eyebrow raised, looking at the current DEFRA guidance on HWRCs, which suggested that there seemed no reason why they couldn't stay open, with the actions of authorities, which seemed to be to close them almost immediately. So there was that question. It seemed to be at odds with what councils really felt was essential at that time. So it would be great, Sarahjane, as a discussion starter today, if you could perhaps bring us up to date with activity and considering that dilemma.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, Stuart. It was actually almost a month to the day that we were talking about this, and DEFRA, I think the night before the webinar, had released some non-statutory guidance stating that HWRCs were medium priority in terms of service delivery. And at that time when we spoke, actually most HWRCs across the country had taken the decision to be closed. Now, since then, there's been a huge raft of almost weekly updates on the situation. But there's also been a little bit of a mood shift in the country amongst the public. Now, the public have been incredibly productive, I'd say, during lockdown. I've seen this period referred to as a national spring clean, to be honest. Everybody is trying to clear out their garage, they're sorting stuff, they're doing the garden. So there's a lot of excess waste, and I'm sensing the mood from when you look at sort of Facebook updates, that everybody's getting just a little bit frustrated about the amount of waste in their garden. But we're also in a much better place in terms of reviewing the evidence on the pandemic, understanding what it means to social distance and clean, and actually our staffing levels are getting to a better place. I think when we spoke a month ago, a lot of local authorities were stating that they were experiencing between a 20 and 40% reduction in staff because of illness. So obviously, the focus was on delivering those important frontline services. HWRCs were, on the whole, shut, really. So what has changed? Well, government have put out an update that has really clarified that a trip to the tip could be essential. Now, in other circumstances, you may believe that the term essential was fairly definitive, but it seems to have taken a bit of an opaque properties, really. One person's essential may not be another person's, and this has caused, as you mentioned, Stuart, quite a lot of differences in terms of the way that the guidance has been interpreted. Now, on the 5th, government released some additional guidance. Ministers have urged councils to plan for the safe reopening of recycling centres. And they've said that they can be open if social distancing can be adhered to. They've also explicitly stated that there's no reason in law that HWRCs can't be opened. The reasons behind opening, they've said that it is really to avoid build-up of waste in homes and to reduce the opportunities for fly tipping. And they've outlined a few key points, including HWRCs have to have enough staff. There has to be a safe environment for visitors and staff, so provision of PPE. There has to be the ability to social distance, but also travel must be essential if their waste is posing a risk to their health, the local environment, or a risk of injury. So I'd encourage listeners to actually have a look at the the government pages at the moment for guidance. There's a huge raft of guidance updates there, including WISH, the Waste Industries Safety and Health Forum, NAUDO, National Association of Waste Disposal Officers, RAP have issued guidance, and as well as some contractors, including Suez and Veolia. So there's some really practical insights into what you need to consider when reopening a HWRC. Thank you, Stuart.
Sarahjane, thank you. That's really helpful. Paul, I wonder if you could help us here. You're service director at Northumberland County Council, so you're responsible for a whole range of services, but including waste management. The County Council took the decision to reopen their household waste recycling centres earlier this week on the 4th of May. Just as a sort of a general feel, could you give us a general feel how it's gone this week?
It's gone extremely well, much better than what we would have hoped for. If anything, we were clearly concerned about a pent-up demand and that we would potentially be overwhelmed with the volume of residents coming to use the facilities, and in doing so then create some quite significant traffic management and safety issues back onto the highway. And several of our facilities, we have 12 household waste sites across the county. 3 of them are co-located on the same access routes as our waste transfer stations that take in all of our refuse collection vehicles. One of them is also co-located with a fire station and has a shared access with that. So there was a whole range of issues that we were concerned about in terms of large numbers of people turning up and basically blocking highway access. But through careful planning, through the use of professional management and professional management staff in terms of traffic management, we put in place some very robust arrangements around the traffic management, the constraints within the sites themselves and the restrictions within the sites, a really comprehensive communications activity in advance of that. And all of that has came together really well. We have had queues. The queues have been a lot lower than what we'd have expected. We have been able to manage that, and people have been really good-natured. And I think, to be fair, a lot of people, whilst there's certainly been, we opened at 8 o'clock on Monday and there was people queuing at 6 on some of the sites. But once those initial demand had gone, it's been just steady away. So there hasn't been that overwhelming inundation that I think we were all expecting. So people, I think, are being sensible on the whole. They are holding on to things unless they really do need to.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Just picking up the topic earlier on about the guidance seeming at odds in some ways, and also the volume of guidance. There is a massive guidance out there. I just wondered if you could perhaps just introduce how you made the decision, bearing in mind the guidance that's out there, to reopen. You were one of the first authorities, I think, to reopen HWRCs. What was your route through that to decide to reopen the sites?
I think the starting point is, why did we close them in the first place? And we closed them along with Suez, who were our contractors, and it was Suez that actually took the decision, but we were very supportive of that. And that was primarily on the basis that we didn't consider that travel was appropriate. It wasn't within the legislation on the restrictions, the coronavirus restrictions. And before the weekend, before the lockdown restrictions came into effect, we had the busiest 2 days in the whole history of our facilities. And with all the will in the world, we could not manage social distancing. People that wanted to social distance on the facilities couldn't social distance. They've got small gantries, they've got narrow pathways. So I think closing the sites was the correct thing to do, and we were supportive of that closure continuing. That did give us the opportunity to look at how we reconfigure the facilities, how can we adjust and amend them to manage social distancing. So we were preparing for that reopening arrangement for a while. But we were still very much of the view that they should remain closed until that guidance changed. So it was the change in the DEFRA guidance that was effectively the game changer for us. The other key issues were initially we weren't seeing much of an increase in fly tipping at all. Fly tipping is not a major problem in Northumberland. We get about 2,500 instances a year, and that's 2,500 too many, but it's not unmanageable. We were seeing an increase in fly tipping. It was starting to eke up week on week to the extent where we normally have around about 60 instances, and it was getting up to 100 plus in the final week before we reopened. And that was primarily people with side waste, with black bags, leaving it in back lanes, not being collected because it's not part of our collection arrangements, and then having to be collected as fly tip material and piling things up at road ends and the like as well. But we were also seeing some quite significant increases in our residual waste coming through the refuse collection arrangements, and that was placing a great deal of strain on our refuse collection rounds and the resilience of our refuse collection rounds. And that was a really key consideration for us in terms of that was continuing to go up and up. And I was getting concerned that if that continued, we'd already taken on additional staff, additional vehicles, we were shuttling loads, we couldn't sustain that level of growth going forward. So that, alongside with social media and the general contact we're getting back and inquiries from members of the public that had that clear pent demand. They'd been clearing the garages, they'd been buying new fridges and freezers, they'd been doing gardening waste, and they were starting to, I think, climb the walls a little bit with having this stuff lying around. We were also getting quite a lot of garden fires in Northumberland, and that was creating issues in terms of community tensions. If you're out and you're having a barbecue in social isolation and you can't see the person sit opposite you for the smoke, it's not a good situation to be in. So we were already thinking, look, we need to start moving on this. The guidance came out just at the right time, and politically there was strong support to have them reopened as soon as we possibly could. So that's what we aim to do, and worked very closely with Suez to achieve that.
Great, thank you.
Excellent. You mentioned fly tipping there. So in your experience, it was mainly household of fly tipping, you think, rather than businesses that you were experiencing. So lack of capacity potentially at the curbside.
Certainly it was primarily black bag type items, white goods and odd bits of furniture and things such as that, and small scale. We had a couple of larger scale fly tipping that were clearly house clearance type activities that were larger than a white van man type activity that was probably more criminal activity than anything, rather just householders committing offences. But it was predominantly just black bag waste and people want to get shot.
Yeah, clear outs.
Yeah.
You mentioned there about one of the reasons that you actually reopened was almost to take the pressure off your curbside services, which is interesting. I was going to ask you about the feedback we're getting from some authorities is that for many they can't run both the curbside services and HWRCs. Seems that you've been able to do both of those. And how have you coped maintaining sufficient staff? Have you got any advice for other authorities on that?
So we did have concerns when the lockdown was announced as to what staff's reaction would be to that. So the night of the actual communication coming out from the PM, we actually sent through our team leaders a very strong message to all of our staff that we need these key services to continue operating. We will work with them and the trade unions to achieve social distancing, to make sure that they are safe. We already had staff that were being shielded for, that health issues and within vulnerable age groups and things such as that. So they were already sorted out. It was just basically trying to encourage our core teams to turn up for work on Monday. Mm-hmm. And thankfully, the vast majority of them have continued to do that and have been absolutely excellent and really supportive. The social distancing on refuse is a real challenge. So we do have loaders that have now got separate vehicles to get them to the start and ends of routes. We are still having some vehicles that have got a driver and a passenger in them because we can't accommodate that in any other way. But we also have continued with our grounds maintenance and cleansing activities. We were really conscious in Northumberland that if we were telling people and following government guidance to not travel, to exercise close to home, that we wanted the environment to be really good for them. So we've continued grass cutting, we've continued street cleansing activity and emptying litter bins and the like. So where we have been able to redeploy staff, it's been primarily out of some of our highways construction activities, and we have used some of our highways construction teams that it's much more difficult to undertake social distancing on that activities that they perform, to bring those teams in to help supplement and support some of our refuse collection teams where necessary. We've got a lot of HGV drivers in particular within the highway side, and we've been having them operate some of our refuse collection vehicles and get a bit of exercise on the back of a bin wagon as well.
Very good.
So
Very good.
That's, across the whole authority, has been really, really good team effort to pull together and to get things done where needed.
The LGA, they mentioned a couple of days ago about one of the conditions of reopening HWRCs was sufficient provision of PPE. Now, that's a highly contentious topic, isn't it? But have you had any problems with PPE supplies?
I think everybody in the country's had problems with PPE supplies. We had issues in terms of the hand sanitizers in particular. We have now managed to address that. So we have very close, we've got our adult social care is a joint service, joint with the NHS. We've got a shared procurement team that works across the NHS as well. So there's a lot of collaboration in Northumberland already on a lot of these activities. So we've already used our core supplier, which is Jewson's, to continue to provide a lot of this equipment to us. We've also tapped into those NHS supplies where we could. We've got a couple of distilleries that have just opened up recently in Northumberland that have converted from gin to sanitizer, sadly.
I wondered where you were going with that. I wondered where you were going. I wonder what they were.
We are telling staff not to drink it. Rather. But we have managed to accommodate that. But the hand sanitizing was a big issue. So was the disposable gloves. And we have got the refuse teams using disposable gloves underneath their workwear gloves as part of that. But on the whole, we don't need the level of PPE that you would do in, where you're having that much closer contact in things such as adult social care and within the NHS. So it has been primarily just about gloves and sanitizer for us.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned social distancing in terms of your frontline services. How are you approaching social distancing on the HWRCs? And also, have you had to inform the police or get advice from the police on reopening as well?
So what we did was we worked very closely with Suez, who are our operator, and also our highways management teams. Because we're a large unitary council, we have
I think yes. Oh dear.
Oh, Paul. Okay. Sarahjane, yes. It's just you and I for a few minutes. I was going to ask about have a discussion on the kind of essential. What is the definition of essential? Because I know Paul sort of touched on it earlier on, but the whole question of essential seems to be quite subjective in a way that what is essential for one person or one family might actually not be essential for others. We've got friends who live in Holland, and their sort of response to the COVID-19 crisis, or hearing back from the Prime Minister's has been saying to the Dutch people, use your intelligence on this. And I guess that I was going to actually ask Paul to comment on the video they've got on the website, which for those of you who can do, I would recommend that you actually check the Northumberland County Council website and have a look at their video on reopening the household waste recycling centres. Not only is it great communication, and that's kind of a big issue, isn't it? And we can maybe come back to that in a second, Sarahjane. But actually, they do pass that if essential message back on to the public. So they're saying, look, there are new rules about using this site, but firstly, you need to make sure that whatever you do, whatever you bring, it's actually essential. And I suppose that's up to every individual to make that decision, isn't it? Whether their particular journey is essential.
Absolutely. And so I mentioned earlier about the government guidance. To paraphrase that, they've said travel must be essential if their waste is posing a risk to their health, local environment, or a risk of injury. But actually, there's lots of ways that you can interpret that as well. It could be posing a risk to your health if you've got lots of waste piled up around. And when I was doing some research for this webinar, looking at lots of different authorities' websites, there is a huge difference in that interpretation of essential and actually what different authorities are communicating to the public. I see we've got Paul back here now.
We have. Hi.
Sorry about that.
Hi. That's okay.
Don't know what happened. I think the power dropped out for some reason.
No worries. No worries.
I think we were talking about social distancing, weren't we? I think just before you.
Yeah, we worked very closely and prepared on a site by site basis detailed plans, both in terms of how we manage the layout within the site and where we'd put cones and what containers people could have access to, and with very much the intention that we were going to limit the number of people on site at any one point in time and do that, gauge those numbers on a site-specific basis to limit the access to containers so that there was no crossing over on walkways and things such as that, and also for the staff in terms of their welfare facilities and how they access their own welfare facilities. Our traffic management teams that we put on at the site entrances, we actually provided highways welfare vehicles for them so they could actually have separate welfare facilities to the staff as well on the household waste centres. So it was very much a case of very detailed planning on a site-specific basis to see how that could actually be configured. And for some of our sites, they are literally just, you come in and it's a compound, and you can only really let one vehicle in at a time. Others, they're much larger, and you can let 4 or 5 vehicles in at any one point in time. So it was very much a site-specific assessment on each facility.
And have you put any restrictions on the number of vehicles that can access a site in terms of? So some authorities have said even and odd number plates, or they've looked at different geographical areas.
We considered that, and we were looking at booking arrangements and looking at putting in place a booking, like a pre-booking, and how how many people would you allow in a 15-minute slot, and to try and even the flows out on that. We actually have a booking system developed and in place. We just didn't go live with it, and one of the key considerations that we were mulling over in advance of it was, what do we do if people just turn up and you've got a long queue of people, and by the time you get to them, they're not in a position where they can realistically turn around. If that message gets out, does it just undermine the whole booking arrangement? We were also mindful we didn't want to make it overly complicated, and that even with a booking system, if you have to close some of our sites or restrict access to them when you're servicing containers, that would throw the booking slots out unless you had regimented periods. So we had concerns that it would just make it a bit too complicated and add additional complication to what is already people being a bit frustrated, and also that it might actually constrain the volumes coming through the sites, because you'd have to err on the side of caution in terms of how many would you have at any one point in time and things such as that turning up. So we also felt that with really good, robust traffic management, you were going to need traffic management even with a booking system, because people will be late, or it might take them longer to get through the site than you expect. So you were going to need that anyway. So we decided we would put in place that very robust traffic management arrangements on all of the sites, see how it went, and have the booking system as a backup plan if that was going to be needed. And thankfully, touch wood and cross fingers, we haven't needed to implement that as yet.
And no need for police on site either.
No, we did raise with the police and make sure they were aware of our intentions and had dialogue with them over that. Generally, the police were quite supportive of the facilities being reopened in terms of they had people reporting fly tipping incidents to them as well, and concerns about garden fires and that community tension type activity that was starting to creep into some of the more urban areas. But in terms of the actual traffic management arrangements, we had all those nailed and sorted ourselves. We've not had to use the police at all.
Could I just, it's a kind of congratulations really, because looking at the Northumberland County Council website, you've got a brilliant video that I've already just plugged while you were not in the room, which is really helpful, really clarifies the issue. And actually I was talking about putting the emphasis back on, is this an essential journey back onto the public, but also just your Q&As on the website, all sorts of questions about what to do if I've got something heavy that I can't actually lift and I need some assistance. I really like the response, which is, well, don't bring it, because unfortunately you've got to be selective and only bring stuff that you're able to get out of the car and put into a container yourselves. But could you say something about the communications approach? Because I really think you've done a great job.
So we were really conscious that we had to try and manage demand right from the outset, and that we also had some clear constraints operating the sites and operating on a modified basis. So clearly we wanted to make sure that it was essential journeys only, that it was those people that really were struggling to cope with the wastes. We also had issues in terms of what off-take arrangements we had with sewers in terms of who was still open to actually receive some of the materials that were collected. So we set right from the start clear site rules as to these are the types of materials that we'll accept, which was limited to general domestic bagged household waste, bulky items, because we felt that people were having to clear out, but only bulky items that they could manage themselves. And we were very clear that the site staff are there to control and to manage the facility, but under social distancing. They're not going to be giving you a hand to lift anything out. If you can't lift it, don't fetch it. And also that we were clearly going to have traffic management issues in place, or traffic management controls in place. We were restricting numbers. It was likely there was going to be queues, that we were limiting it to cars and small vans, so large transit size and large trailers above 5 foot was a no, because that just ties up the site and it means the queue is going to be even longer. We also were mindful that we were the only ones in the region that were opening, and we've got some of our sites are quite close to our administrative boundaries. So we also put in place, we want proof of ID, and that was, driver license, utility bill displayed in the window. And all of that, to be fair, has gone really well. We put out the messages through social media. We put out messages through our comms team, who've done a really good job. You've seen the video. We've used all of the usual media channels that you would do that. And on our Twitter and Facebook side, we had over 400,000 views and shares on that.
Wow.
The next one down that they'd let out that week was 20,000. So we were really
wow. Yeah.
And that was a little bit scary, because when you got 400,000, we have a population of 340 odd thousand, so it was more than the whole population. I looked at that, and the idea that we're all going to turn up on Monday at 8 o'clock in the morning did keep us awake on Sunday night. But thankfully people have been really good natured, really sensible, and the site staff have been really good natured in the dealings with people as well. And it is that kind of community spirit has really come together, and people are used to queuing a little bit more now, and are used to a little bit of disruption, and they're just being thankful to get rid of some of the stuff they've been hoarding.
Very good. Thanks very much for that. Paul, I mean, we're about out of time, but have you got any other thoughts that you would like to sort of mention? We've got a number of other authorities on the webinar. Actually, if there's anything we've not covered that you think is important, or anything you'd like to sort of note?
I think it is just that it's that teamwork and that site-specific thinking, what the issues are on a site-specific basis, really detailed planning. And the one thing that we really benefited from, it wasn't just the communication side, because we've got a good communications team, but it was involving our highways teams that are professional traffic management staff to think some creative ways as to, if there's big long queue down here, how was the best way of sorting it out? What's the point at which there's no one can queue past this location, because it becomes a safety issue? And on the back of that, we actually put in some one-way systems. We've put in traffic lights on some of the areas as well, and that's worked a treat. It's been really good. So we've got some live webcam feeds, so people can see the webcam and see if there's a big queue before they turn up. So
there might be some things you'll keep following COVID-19. There might be some things that you kind of decide could be good practice for the future.
Certainly the traffic management on the busy bank holidays is something that we'll be having a look at in future, because it has really helped just to manage the demand and the flows through from a highway safety perspective. Yeah.
Very good. Listen, can I thank you very much for joining me. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Sarahjane. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for all of you joining the webinar today. So stay safe, and that's all from us. And bye for now. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.